This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is Community Forestry Program Coordinator Matt Norville from the Kansas Forest Service discussing why people should prune their trees. He explains how and when it should be done. Director of the Land Use Survey Office at K-State, Leah Tsoodle, continues the show with information about the custom rate survey that she encourages producers to fill out. Also included is a Kansas profile with Ron Wilson from the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development. Mike Brouk, K-State dairy specialist, ends today's show by discussing 3 things dairy producers can do to protect calves during extremely cold weather. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show discussing pruning trees. And to talk about it, we're joined by Community Forestry Program Coordinator with the Kansas Forest Service, Matt Norville. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Matt, talking about pruning trees, what trees need pruning?
Every tree needs pruning. It just depends on how much of a pruning it needs. I recommend everyone should go look at the trees around their house and first see if there's any dead branches, and then once those are identified, think about if the tree has good structure or not.
And as we're thinking about pruning and taking it down first to a little bit smaller level, the roots, and sometimes the roots need pruning before you even plant them.
Yeah, so we're not talking about digging up the tree every 2 years and looking at the roots and pruning them, like that, like you would do with the above part of the tree. But it's interesting. Whenever we get called out to diagnose a sick tree, we only see half of the problem. The other half of the problem is in the soil. It's invisible to us unless we take an air spade to it. An air spade is a tool that blows a lot of compressed air so you can blow dirt away from the roots and examine them. But yeah, when you're planting a tree, especially if it comes out of a container, you want to pay attention to the roots. You can set yourself up for failure 20, 50 years down the road if you don't. If the tree is in a container for a long period of time, people are probably familiar with the term root bound. What that kind of means and what the main problem is, you can get girdling roots that hit the side of the container. The new roots grow out, hit the side of the container. They can't grow anymore, so they kind of do a U-turn and grow back into the root ball. It's not a big deal when it's a small tree. The tree's not going to experience anything bad when it's small. But once that tree grows and puts on that secondary growth, the growth that makes the trunk wider, and then that root also gets secondary growth, making the root wider, the root and the trunk start competing for the same space at the root flare. And 20, 50 years down the road, you can have the trunk growing into those roots, and those roots become what we call girdling roots. And it can cut off the flow of sugars primarily, and if it's deep enough, water from the leaves or to the leaves, depending if it's sugar or water, they flow opposite ways, and then also ultimately lead to the demise of a tree. After a big windstorm, especially if the wind comes from a direction that the tree's not used to, one way you can identify this at the failure is if you do see the tree blown over at the trunk and it looks like a pencil tip sharpened, it's probably experience of a girdling root. So to prevent that, an easy way, best management practice when you're planting a container tree or even a ball and burlap tree is take a handsaw and just save the root ball. I'm not saying take half of the roots off, not nearly that, maybe like a ½ inch of the roots off. Just save it as a cube all the way around or a trapezoid all the way around, and just saving the ends. So hopefully you're severing the roots that are hit the container and growing back into the root ball, preventing girdling roots and saving you a problem 30, 50 years down the road.
So that's something you do before you plant it. And then as we think about maybe once it's already been planted and it's become more of a mature tree, an older tree, when do you maybe need to prune, or what are the signs that say it's time to prune this tree?
So I would look at all my trees at least once every other year or once every 2 years and try to identify defects. I would look at all my trees from the seedling sapling stage all the way to my very mature trees. The primarily first thing you're going to look for is dead branches. Once you identify those, you're going to look at the structure of the tree. The younger trees, you can definitely adjust the structure a lot more. You have more of an opportunity to set the tree up for success than you do with mature trees. You're looking for wide branch unions. You don't want branches joining the trunk in a V shape. You want it more in a U shape. It produces a stronger joint, and it prevents inclusive wood, so bulk and bulk growing together, and that can cause problems in the future. This produces a weak joint, which will fail underneath snow or ice or wind loading. So make sure you don't have branches crisscrossing, overlapping. There's a lot of different ways you can prune. You don't want to remove more than a third of the canopy anytime you prune, and you want to prune for apical dominance, so that traditional tree growth with, a strong central leader.
So it sounds like a lot of times the people can just prune their trees, but are there scenarios where they might want to pay someone to do it?
Yeah, if you find yourself climbing on a ladder holding a chainsaw above your head, you probably want to call a professional in at that point. You probably want to call an arborist. If at any point, you're thinking, hey, I'm going to pull on it this way with a rope and cut on it this way with a saw, and it starts getting really complex, I'd probably call an arborist. If at any point you feel like you're over your head, probably call an arborist. You can go to Kansas Arborist Association's website and use the Find an Arborist tool to find your nearest sort of credentialed professional. You could also go to the International Society of Arboriculture's website, and they have another credential program to find a certified arborist that can prune your trees. But we don't want people causing damage to the trees, and we don't want people causing damage to themselves or to the property. So anytime you're by power lines, you feel overextended, you're looking at using power tools that aren't really designed for that, I would probably call an arborist.
And so why is it so important that people take the time to prune those trees?
So it's caring for the health of the tree. By removing dead wood, you're removing areas that disease and insects will harbor in. You're also setting the tree up to be strong, so when you do have windstorms come in, you don't get broken branches. By pruning properly, you're going to cause a smaller wound to the tree than if the branch is just ripped off. And it's important to produce small wounds on the tree versus a bigger wound, because unlike humans, where when we get a cut, we heal up, trees don't heal up, they seal off. They try to compartmentalize that area and set up physiological and chemical barriers to prevent these vectors of diseases coming in. So by doing it properly, you're reducing the likelihood of decay entering your tree. And if decay gets in your tree, it can become a liability, 10 years later down the road.
Is there a time of year that's the best time to prune trees?
I really like to prune in February and March. I like to prune kind of right before bud break, just because it gives that tree a whole growing season to use this physiological and chemical processes to compartmentalize off that wound. I wouldn't try to prune in the late summer or fall time unless it's like a dead hanging branch that is a hazard, just because that time of year the tree's kind of directing its energy to different processes that would take away from compartmentalization of the decay, or of compartmentalization of decaying trees, which is the process of using those 5 different walls to prevent decay from entering the tree.
If people would like to learn more information about this, where can they do that?
I would go to our website. That's a great area. If you just Google the 3-cut pruning method, that will produce a bunch of information and diagrams about how to make a proper pruning cut. You could also give your local district forester a phone call, and they can talk to you about pruning and answer any additional questions you may have.
Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about pruning trees.
Thanks for having me.
That was Community Forestry Program Coordinator with the Kansas Forest Service, Matt Norville. As always, you can find more information from the Kansas Forest Service at kansasforest.org. Again, that is kansasforest.org. Before we cut to a short break now, we're going to be joined by K-State agricultural economist Robin Reed to remind us about the upcoming Women Managing the Farm Conference taking place in Manhattan, Kansas, February 14th through the 16th. 16th. Robin, if people are interested in the Women Managing the Farm Conference, how do they go about finding more information and getting registered for it?
So the easiest thing is to go to the website, www.womenmanagingthefarm.com, and you can see all of the information, the agenda, registration, bios of the keynote speakers. All of that information is on the website, and that's the best place to go to register as well. You can register completely online there. Pre-conference sessions are additional $25. If you register after January 18th, the price does go up to $200. One special thing that we started last year is also a student rate, and that could be for high school students, that could be for college students, that could be for traditional women that happen to be going back to school right now. But that rate is $75, and that does not increase after the 18th. We really want to encourage students to attend this conference as well.
That was Kansas State University agricultural economist Robin Reed sharing information about the upcoming Women Managing the Farm Conference taking place February 14th through the 16th in Manhattan, Kansas. This year's theme is Rise. If you'd like to get registered for this event, you can do so. Right now, the registration cost is $200. However, there is a student rate of $75 for any high school or college students. There are some pre-conference options taking place, and those cost an additional $25. If you'd like to get registered for this event, check out the agenda, or see what those pre-conference options are, you can do that by going to womenmanagingthefarm.com. Again, that is womenmanagingthefarm.com. I will put a link to it in today's show notes on agtoday.net, as well as the Kansas Forest Service's website. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing the 2024 Kansas Custom Rates Survey. And in to talk about it, we're joined by Director of the Land Use Survey Office at K-State's Agricultural Economics Department, Leah Tsoodle. Leah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Shelby. I appreciate it.
Leah, what is the 2024 Kansas Custom Rates Survey?
So it is our version of, it's the 2024 version of the Kansas Custom Rates Survey that's done every other year. It's funded by the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and we conduct it to gather information for folks around Kansas to get an idea what rates are being charged for custom operations for like hauling and harvesting, for tillage work, for haying, and on and on.
And so what do you really see it providing for Kansas and its producers?
Honestly, it's a great centralized source for data because this is going to encompass custom operation prices across the state. And instead of having to contact a whole bunch of different dealers, you can contact one and kind of compare to this report and see if they're in the ballpark. Because that's really, it's not providing a specific rate for a specific custom operation, but it lets you know kind of what the area rate being charged is.
So since K-State has been doing this survey since 2016, have you been able to track what changes have been happening in Kansas?
Well, as with all things, most prices are going up. We haven't done any specific research targeting what price changes are happening in what specific areas or whether certain areas are going up higher than other areas. But we have what we found and why this year is really critical is because in 2022, we had dramatic increases in fertilizer and, of course, in fuel prices. And they were super volatile. And so 2024 is kind of going to, I think, prices they skyrocketed in 2022, and we've had some rebound. And so 2024, gathering this information is going to be really critical for folks to see what that rebound looks like.
What people do you recommend take the time to take this survey?
Oh, gosh, any custom operators that we can get to take the survey is fantastic. Also, producers who may provide custom services or pay for custom services. Either one of those. Landowners, co-op, if they're providing custom services to their members, any of those folks would be great providers of information for us.
And what information should they maybe have ready before they start this survey?
So we ask for, I don't think it's going to be anything, we try to ask for rates in a variety of ways so that they're not having to search for information. A lot of the rates are dollars per acre, or we provide the option to give us a flat rate. Generally, try to be pretty flexible on the responses and provide another option if, honestly, in case there's something outside the norm that they charge.
If producers are thinking about this survey, how long does it take them?
So I would like to say 5 minutes, but I can't say that because it asks for a lot of information, and it's all very valuable. And between 15, honestly, just flat out, hate to say it, but between 15 and 20 minutes.
If producers are willing to take this survey, which you encourage them to do so, where can they find it?
So the link, and this is, it sounds strange, but it is tiny URL, tinyurl.com/custom 2024. tinyurl.com/custom 2024.
That was Director of the Land Use Survey Office at K-State's Agricultural Economics Department, Leah Tsoodle, and she was discussing the 2024 Kansas Custom Rates Survey. If you have time to take this survey, you can find it by going to tinyurl.com/custom 2024. That is tinyurl.com/custom 2024, and I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. This survey will be closing on April 30th, 2024. And if you'd like to see results from past surveys, you can find those by going to agmanager.info and clicking on custom rates on the top tabs. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Ron Wilson from the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. Connect the dots. That was a fun game when I was a kid. Today we'll learn about an initiative which is connecting farms, communities, and visitors across the Flint Hills. Not with dots, but with the art of barn quilts. It's today's Kansas Profile. Connie Larson is one of the founders of the Flint Hills Quilt Trail, which originated in 2013. Larson joined with Abby Amick of Wabaunsee County, Sue Hageman of Riley County, and Marcia Roselle, now tourism director in Manhattan, in launching the Barn Quilt Trail in the Flint Hills. Connie and her family operate Ag Heritage Park, the farm equipment museum at the rural community of Alta Vista, population 409 people. Now that's rural. They put up barn quilts at Ag Heritage Park. That inspired the idea of doing these regionally. What are barn quilts? They're quilt patterns that are painted onto a board and put on the outside of a structure such as a barn or shed, Larson said. Most are painted on highly weather-resistant MDO boards. These eye-catching, colorful works of art can decorate a farmstead and even attract visitors. The barn quilt idea originated in Ohio, where a woman posted a quilt design outside on her barn in honor of her mother, who was a quilter. Then another nearby barn owner did the same. Eventually, a series of these was created. Each design was different. They attracted visitors who wanted to go from one to another. This became known as a barn quilt trail. The phenomenon moved west across the nation. In 2012, Connie Larson, Abby Amick, Sue Hageman, and Marcia Roselle started exploring the idea of creating a barn quilt trail throughout the Kansas Flint Hills. The Flint Hills Tourism Coalition created a committee, and the idea gained support. The Flint Hills Quilt Trail had a busy start in 2013. The committee established a website, issued news releases, began recording quilt blocks on the website, and organized a network of quilt trail representatives across the Flint Hills. By July 2013, the trail included 30 quilt blocks located in 13 Flint Hills counties. Connie Larson and others began offering barn quilt painting classes in the region. Larson enjoys painting them herself. The quilt trail continued to grow. "This is artwork to promote rural areas," Larson said. "It's kind of a hobby," she said. "People like to drive around and see the different barn quilts, and it gets people into the small towns," she said. By attracting visitors, it can spotlight farms and ranches and help the economy of rural communities. Once a person finds or creates one barn quilt, he or she tends to be curious to see what the next one might look like. It becomes like a treasure hunt or a fun addiction. "My brother told us it was like a disease," Larson said with a smile. "It's like quilting," she said. You do one design and then you see another pattern and you just have to try it. Often the barn quilts are displayed by individual landowners. Some businesses have started putting them up too, Larson said. A woman named Susie Perrin created the American Quilt Trail program. She came to Kansas and wrote about the Flint Hills Barn Quilt Trail in a 2016 book. As of 2023, those original 30 quilt blocks had grown into 525 website listings in every Flint Hills county, plus neighboring counties north and south from state line to state line. It's still growing, Larson said. Not only do the barn quilts create attractive visual art in a rural setting, they create a linkage of communities across the region. It's connecting the dots across the Flint Hills, Larson said. We still add barn quilts and update the website. We want to celebrate our success, she said. For more information, see www.ksflinthillsquilttrail.com. Connect the dots. That was a fun game as a kid, and it's still fun to connect things. We commend Connie Larson, Abby Amick, Sue Hegeman, and Marcia Roselle for making a difference by creating a barn quilt trail and thinking regionally. In the Flint Hills region, they are creating visual art and making connections. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
That was director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University, Ron Wilson, with a Kansas profile that was titled The Art of Barn Quilts. If you'd like to see other Kansas profiles, I will put a link in today's show notes where you can check those out. I will also put a link to K-State Research and Extension's website if you'd like to keep up to date with what we're doing. You can also find it, however, by going to www.ksre.ksu.edu. Stick around because we're cutting to a short break, but we'll be right back with more.
This is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Extremely cold temperatures can create a variety of problems on the dairy, including the care of calves. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk discusses 3 things this week that dairy producers can do to aid calves. It includes warming milk before feeding calves, using calf blankets, and providing access to warm water following each feeding.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning calf care during extreme winter weather temperatures. We've addressed this previously in this program, but wanted to hit a couple of high points again today and remind producers of some of the important things that we need to do to help our calves adjust and survive this cold weather. When we think about our heifer calves out there, they're the future of our dairy herd, and in today's environment with the increase in their value, it's very, very important that we try to keep them as healthy as possible so they can withstand the challenges of winter weather. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, milk feeding. As we think about the temperature at which we feed milk, we should warm that milk to about 103 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit before we take it outside and offer the bottles to the calves. That's really, really critical because those bottles will cool a little bit before the calf finishes drinking, and it's important that we have the milk as warm as possible. That will help the animal maintain their body temperatures. and will prevent them from becoming chilled because they drank cold milk. The other thing about animals that are offered cold milk or cool milk even, the issue is they may not drink the full feeding, which creates another problem because now they're short of calories to carry them to the next feeding. Keeping in mind that these calves, particularly in the first few weeks of life, do not have very much reserve or excess fat, so we need to make sure that we try to get as many calories in them as possible. Another important part of this is making sure that we're feeding enough solids to the calves. Increasing the amount of solids that we feed through increasing the volume that we feed has been very important in improving calf health, especially during the wintertime. So if you're not feeding 2, 3, maybe even as much as 4 quarts per feeding, you might want to consider your overall feeding program, particularly in the wintertime, and this will also increase calf growth during the summer. Accelerated growth feeding programs have been very helpful in trying to keep calves hydrated and supplying them with enough calories to survive colder temperatures. For those of you that may not be using calf blankets, again, during extreme cold, this is another way to keep the animal warm. I encourage you to consider that. It's been shown to improve the health of these calves as well as the growth during extreme temperatures. Finally, just want to remind you of the importance of offering warm water to the calves multiple times during the day. I know it's a pain during the winter time. I know it's going to freeze if you leave it in the buckets too long. I would suggest this. If you could allow the calves to drink their milk and then about 10 minutes later come by with warm water that you put into their water bucket. You don't have to put a ton in there, just enough to make sure that they get some additional liquid, as they will need that to maintain hydration. If you put that warm water in, it is going to freeze. However, if you come by a bit later, maybe 30 minutes later, and dump those pails, that would probably be okay. It'll make it easier than trying to break ice the next time you feed the calves. And as you do the second or third feedings of the day, make sure that you offer warm water after each of the feedings. It's important that we do this so that animals maintain hydration even during the winter time. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to pay a little more attention as they take care of their calves during the extreme cold.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.